In this video, we are going to answer one of the most frequently asked questions we receive from our viewers. What are those mysterious lines in many pictures of nuclear explosions? Development of the fireball in an airburst can be subdivided into several phases. During the first microseconds after the explosion, the radiation front expands faster than the inner shock wave. As the fireball expands, transfer of energy by radiation slows and the inner shock wave begins to overtake the radiation front. When the average temperature of the fireball drops to 300,000 degrees Celsius, which for a 20 kiloton burst occurs at about 1/10 of a millisecond after the explosion, the shock front begins to move ahead of the radiation front of the inner isothermal sphere. The shock front compresses the ambient air, raising its temperature sufficiently to render the air incandescent and opaque. As the expansion of the fireball progresses, the temperature of the shocked air decreases steadily. Eventually, the shock front becomes practically invisible as it loses strength and can no longer render air incandescent through compression heating. Once this occurs, the isothermal sphere becomes visible through the shock front. The onset of this condition, at about 15 milliseconds after detonation, is referred to as a breakaway. The faintness of the shock front makes recording its progress difficult. Shock pressure gauges can be used, but they are hard to deploy anywhere except near the ground, where interactions between the shock wave and the surface affect the accuracy of readings. A solution to this problem was suggested by a casual observation of the very first nuclear test, the Trinity shot on July 16, 1945. A high-speed camera photographed the cable of a barrage balloon behind the fireball that was visible due to the smoke emitted by its vaporizing steel. As the shock front passed in front of the cable, which is in the background, an apparent break appeared in the cable, an optical illusion caused by the refraction of light by the compressed air behind the shock front. The arrow shows the movement of this break along the cable, which coincides with the location of the shock front, thus allowing his progress to be measured. Here you can see the breakaway as the fireball increases at a slower rate than before. Several years later, this phenomena was put to use with the aid of smoke rockets specially designed by the Naval Ordnance Laboratory to track the invisible shock front. These rockets were located along the blast line and launched from the ground seconds before the detonation, thereby creating a vertical array of white smoke trails. This enabled the shock wave's progress to be followed by observing the hooks in the smoke trails at the shock front. Due to the change in the refractive index of the air, the trails recorded the shock front as a function of space and time from which the shock velocity could be calculated. This in turn allowed calculations of the shock over pressure versus space around the burst using the Rankine-Huguenot conditions. This high-speed camera footage shows how the shock front creates the hooks on the smoke trails, which are in the background.